County Councillor and Mayor for the town of Shelburne. And it is my privilege to welcome everybody here today for our latest iteration of our Team Dufferin series. Today, we're happy to welcome Joy Knott to Shelburne, who's going to talk to us about trade tensions, tariffs, and local strategy. So thank you all for coming. I think most of our audience has actually decided to stay home and enjoy this from the comfort of their air conditioning at their home or at their office. But whether you're here in person or online, thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I am just going to read the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that Dufferin County resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Tianantati, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. We also acknowledge that various municipalities within the county of Dufferin reside within the treaty lands named under the Haldeman Deed of 1784 and two of the Williams Treaties of 1818, Treaty 18, the Nottawasaga Purchase, and Treaty 19, the Adjutant's Treaty. These traditional territories upon which we live and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions, and it is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Yao Ennen, who will introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you, Councillor Mills. Okay, so welcome once again, everyone, for joining us in our third of our Team Dufferin seminar series. We are privileged here today to be joined by Joy Knott, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about Joy Knott in a second. But just to give you guys an agenda for what we're going to be doing today, Joy is going to be speaking and presenting for about 40 or so minutes, followed by a Q&A session. And then after the Q&A, we're going to have a quick break, and then we'll come back from the break, and then we'll have some presentations from some local businesses. We're joined here in this meeting by Colleen McKenzie from Novelex, also Mark Ruser, who is the director for OFA, Ontario Federation of Agriculture, for Wellington, Dufferin, and I'm missing one county, Waterloo. So Mark is here as well, and then we're going to have Leo Blydorp also presenting today. So just to guide some discussions around what exactly these tariffs mean for Dufferin County and what trade can look like for Dufferin County in the future and in the short term as well. So without much ado, our speaker today is a partner in the trade and customs practice at KPMG. She has over 30 years of experience in customs compliance to the market. She was previously president of the Canadian Importers and Exporters Association, i.e. Canada, as well as a former vice president and managing consultant for JP Morgan Global Trade Management Services in Toronto. And in speaking with Joy, this description actually does not do her justice. She's been in the business for many decades. So she's a wealth of knowledge, and we are privileged to have her, like I said. So let's welcome Joy Knott.
Thank you, everyone. And what I'm going to be doing today, before I get there, after today's session, if you have any questions and if you want to get in touch with me, there's two ways you can do that. You can do that through today's organizers of today's event. Feel free to reach out to them and they'll get you in touch with me. Conversely, you can also follow me on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Okay. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be covering a number of different topics when it comes to tariffs, and I'm going to try and make this as easy on the ears as possible. I promise not to use any jargon. I promise to move through it quickly so that we can all move on to the best part of the presentation, which is the question and answer period. So as a partner at KPMG, I deal with a lot of companies, big and small. And right now we're seeing a lot of tensions in that a lot of things that normally companies have clarity on, there is no clarity anymore. So we have a free trade agreement that was negotiated with the United States, and it became effective July 1st, 2020. You would think that that is enough to give us confidence and certainty when we're dealing with the United States, but I'm sure you'd have to be living under a rock not to know what's been happening lately relative to trade tensions coming out of the United States. One of the questions I get asked most frequently is exactly what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax that's charged on anything physical that crosses a border. So I'm often asked, for example, can tariffs be applied to software that's downloaded over the internet? No, it's not physical. It may cross international borders if you want to think of it that way, but it's not physical, and it did not cross an international border in the physical sense. So when you heard, for example, the President of the United States say that he wanted to put a tariff on movies, remember that a few months ago? We're going to put 25% on movies. You can't tariff a movie. You can put a tax on it, but you can't tariff it. And this administration, tax is a bad word. Tariff, he literally has said the words that tariff is his favorite word. He has said that. So in order to calculate a tariff, there's a couple of data points that you need. First of all, you need to know what the tariff classification is. What's a tariff classification? Picture, if you will, a book that's probably, if you were to print it off, the book is probably about more than a foot thick, printed on both sides. And what that book contains are numbers that Canada, as a member of the World Trade Organization, we've all signed on to that same book. And that book, in theory, contains a number for every physical thing that you can think of. Everything from live animals to manufactured goods to things that you pull out of the ground to you name it. If you can think of it and it's physical, there's a number in that book that applies to that particular good. You need to know that number. And then in conjunction, you need to know what the country of origin is. Well, what's the country of origin? It's not the country that the goods were shipped from. It's the country where the goods were made or otherwise took on their substantial character, where they became what you would call it today. So that's the country of origin. You put those two things together. Oops.
It's not, wasn't popping up.
Okay, I'll just keep going. So you need the country of origin and you need the tariff classification. You marry those two things together in the book. Think of it like a large telephone book. You look up the number, then you go across, what's my country of origin for this number? Country of origin is this, that's my rate. Okay? That's your normal rate of duty. Then you take your normal rate of duty and you add the current rates that you've heard floating around, 25%, 50%, 15%, depends on what you're talking about. There's different rates that have been floating around. You take your normal duty rate, you add it to that, I'll call it new era duty rate, add those two things together, then you multiply it by the customs value. What's the customs value? In 98% of cases, it's when two companies that are unrelated to each other buy and sell things to each other. Whatever that price is, that's what the price is that's used to calculate duties. If two companies are related, which a lot of Canadian companies have American subsidiaries or are subsidiaries of an American company, if two companies are related, then you have to be able to prove through a series of tests that that relationship didn't artificially influence the price downward. So just imagine for a second, if I was going to sell my brother my car, if there were no rules around it, I'd be like, yeah, give me $1. Give me $1 for my $50,000 car, right? Pay taxes on $1 and everybody's happy. If he's a stranger on the street, am I going to sell my car for $1? Absolutely not. I'll sell it for 50,000. That's why when two companies are related, they need to be able to show that that relationship didn't artificially impact the price. Once you put all those things together, there's your arithmetic. Your total amount of duties, your total amount of duty rates times your customs duty, that's how you calculate how much tariffs there are. And now this isn't working anymore. There we go. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be touching on both American tariffs, and in Canada, we have retaliatory tariffs, which we call surtaxes. What's a surtax? It's literally, if you think about the word, sur meaning on top, tax. So it's a tax that sits on top of something else. That's a Canadian specific word. In the United States, they use tariffs. So if you hear me use tariffs interchangeably with Canada, it's just because most of the people that I talk to don't necessarily know the meaning of the word surtax, but technically speaking, as Canadians, that's what we should be talking about. We have retaliatory surtaxes against the United States. But what does the US put in place? So this is a page that contains all of the sectoral duty rates. And I'm not sure why the slides are no longer formatted, but so steel and aluminum, 50%. Cars, full cars manufactured anywhere in the world, including Canada, 25%. Car parts from anywhere in the world, including Canada, but I'm going to get back to that in a second, 25%. And then the last one, as far as we know, has never actually been applied. It's any country that buys crude oil from Venezuela. If the United States can prove that that country bought crude oil from Venezuela, all of their goods from that country would attract a 25% tariff. So as far as we know, that last one, the Venezuelan oil, has never been applied. The car parts from Canada, Canada and Mexico right now have a carve out where if what we make in Canada qualifies for our free trade agreement that we negotiated that became effective July 1st, 2020. In Canada, we call it CUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. In the United States, they call it the USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and in Mexico, they call it TMEC. It's 3 pieces of legislation that exist in each one of those countries that is literally identical. Comma for comma, semicolon for semicolon, identical in all 3 countries. Okay? If our goods qualify for the free trade agreement, that includes car parts, the car parts do not attract any tariffs. Cars, however, the part of the car that is US made, that we can prove as Canadians, a full car that we make, let's say in Oshawa or somewhere in Windsor or in Alliston for that matter, if we can prove what percentage of the car is quote unquote US made, you don't have to pay 25% tariffs on the US content. So on day one, when that came out, car manufacturers didn't have the math down. They didn't know how to calculate that. They have since worked on it. And as far as I know, most of the OEMs, the car manufacturers, are now declaring the portion of the vehicle that's quote unquote US so that they don't have to pay the 25% tariff on that. Other things that have been threatened, I'm sure you heard about pharmaceuticals at 200%. The president has said that he will charge 200% on pharmaceuticals, but he's going to give pharmaceutical companies 1 year to build facilities in the United States, and then the 200% will apply. So as far as I know, it takes way more than a year to build a pharmaceutical facility in the United States that could actually manufacture pharmaceuticals. Semiconductors at 25%, copper at 50%. The largest copper import into the United States comes from Chile, followed by Canada. So the copper imports at 50% does impact Canada quite a bit. And then lumber. Canada and the United States have had an ongoing dispute about lumber going back 40 years, 50 years. Late 50s, early 60s is when the lumber dispute initially started. It really picked up speed in the 1970s, got really heated in the 1980s. We kind of came to a bit of a truce in the 1990s. It heated up in the 2000s, and we're back. It's heating up once again. So there's a current landscape right now. I'm sure you've heard every day in the news, we hear about a different deal, right? Yesterday, it was all about Europe. Yesterday, the day before, was all about Europe. Europe cut a deal with the United Kingdom, with the United States. The United Kingdom was the first one to do it. There are a number of different countries that have quote unquote cut deals with the United States. Let me just say this when it comes to those deals. 2025 is actually my 40th year doing trade and customs. I have seen every free trade agreement that Canada has negotiated since the early 1980s. And I can tell you that a free trade agreement is usually 6 inches thick. The deals that we're seeing right now, page and a half. So if you ask me, is that actually a deal, a trade deal? I would say no. At most, it's a memo on trade that may contain a few data points. There's not enough detail in there right now to, from my perspective, for us to really count on that it won't change next month, next quarter, 6 months from now. There's nothing, there's no meat in the bones for us to put it into law guaranteeing that it won't change. So there's a couple on here that are quite interesting. Going around the hoop, starting at the top, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS countries. They are thinking about no longer using the US dollar as its reserve currency. The United States has said, if you do that as a block of countries, we will charge your countries 10% on top of any other tariffs that we charge individual countries. So for example, he's threatened Brazil with 50%. If the BRIC countries use something other than the US dollar as their reserve currency, Brazil would be at 60%. Going to skip United Kingdom. United Kingdom got a deal, but if you say to me, what kind of a deal? They got a certain amount of cars in duty free, like 100,000 vehicles a year. After that, they're still paying 10% reciprocals. They're still paying tariffs on car parts and stuff. So how much of a deal did they actually get? In my eyes, a very small deal, if anything. I talked about Brazil. The United States has threatened Brazil with a 50% tariff. Why? Brazil actually has, the United States actually has a surplus with Brazil, meaning the United States sells more to Brazil than Brazil buys from the United States. And in the eyes of the current president, that's good. That means the US is winning, right? They buy more from us than we sell them more than they buy from us. Whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. That's a good thing. Why then is he threatening Brazil with a 50% tariff? He doesn't like the fact that the courts in Brazil are going after the president, the former president of Brazil, for an uprising after losing a political election. A group of his supporters stormed their parliament, trying to overturn the results of the election. Sound familiar? So in Brazil, they're taking that former president to court, accusing him of whatever, a various breach of laws. And the current president does not like that. So he is threatening Brazil, despite the fact the United States has a trade surplus with Brazil. He's threatening them with a 50% tariff. So what's the takeaway from all of this? This current president views tariffs as the single solution, no matter what the problem is. If there's a problem, tariffs are a hammer and every problem is a nail. Doesn't matter what the problem is, the solution is throw a tariff at it. And that I don't think is going to change. If you listen to him when he was on the campaign trail, campaigning to be president this time around, he talked at length about tariffs. Tariffs are at the center of his foreign policy and at the center of everything that he does. The European Union just cut a deal the other day for 15% across the board. Canada and Mexico. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about reciprocal tariffs. What's a reciprocal tariff? To be honest, I had never heard of it until the president talked about it, because as per the World Trade Organization, there is no such thing as a reciprocal tariff. But when the president explains it, he explains it as, if you charge me a tariff, I'm going to charge you the same tariff back, which sounds simple enough and it sounds fair. Without going into any kind of detail, I can tell you it breaks almost every World Trade Organization rule that you can think of. So Canada and Mexico and Russia were the three countries that did not get a reciprocal tariff. On April 2nd, when he was standing out in the Rose Garden, he was holding up those big cards with all the country names and stuff on it. The country names were these countries. Canada's not on it, Mexico's not on it. And if you notice, Brazil's not on it because Brazil has a surplus, right? But now Brazil is being threatened. So these countries now that you see on this list that are marked in yellow, they've received letters, that page-and-a-half letter stating your tariff rate is going to be X. So if you see those countries in yellow with their yellow rate, that's the rate that their letter said to them. If you see the highlights in green, those are countries that have quote unquote cut a deal, another page and a half memo, with the United States. The only thing that I sort of found interesting is that the day before yesterday, when they were talking a lot about the European deal that was cut, in a communique that was put out by the White House, they talked about putting together rules of origin that would stop third countries, take that to mean China, from somehow or another infiltrating the free trade agreement between the two major parties, right? So the first time that he started talking about rules of origin, I thought, oh my goodness, that's going back to when I said trade agreements are normally a foot thick, and they're normally full of things called rules of origin, very specific, detailed instructions about how your goods can qualify. So there's sort of, maybe I have hope that we'll maybe see more meat on the bones so that people such as myself can help guide companies such as those of you in the audience today on exactly what you need to do to make your goods qualify for whatever deal is cut. Now, out of the US tariffs, back on April 20, I'm sure you probably heard in the media that things were stacking. So if you had something that was made, you had a car part that was 25%, then it was made from steel. Steel and aluminum were originally 25%, and they got bumped to 50. So you have car part 25, steel another 25 or 50, and they were adding up. So 25 plus 50 plus plus plus. On April 29th, the US government finally said, we're going to stop the stacking because it wasn't really what they intended to have happen. Although the president was very happy about all the extra revenue that was coming in, he said it wasn't the policy intent. So what they've done is they've taken all the different tariffs and there's an order to them. So the first thing that you need to look at is what we're talking about at the border, a car part. If it is, stop there. That's the only tariff that applies. If it's not a car part, then the next thing is it made of aluminum? The answer is no. Keep going. Is it made of steel? No, keep going. The next thing, is it from Canada? We'll say yes for this room. Boom, stop there. That's the tariff that applies. So there's a specific order that the law requires that you consider the tariffs in, and that's the order there. Now, when it comes to Canada and Mexico and all the countries on this list that I was showing you, these tariffs are under the legislative tool that the president has called IEEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, IEEPA, IEEPA. In order for the president to use IEEPA, the first thing that he needs, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, there needs to be an emergency. So under the National Emergencies Act, he declared emergencies. For Canada and Mexico, it was fentanyl and illegal immigration. For the rest of the world, he said it's persistent trade deficits. But we're all under IEEPA. There are different levers that the American president can pull. One is IEEPA, and it's like a slot machine for him. He pulls that thing constantly, IEEPA, IEEPA, because he does not need congressional approval for IEEPA. The other levers that he has to pull are something called Section 301 for unfair trading practices, or Section 232 for national security reasons. Those, in order to pull those levers, it has to go through Congress. It needs to go through the Department of Commerce, needs to do a study, and then it goes through Congress and it goes through committee, and all kinds of steps have to happen. IEEPA, he declares an emergency. He does an executive order. He signs it, he holds it up, boom, we're done. Okay, so all of that to say, a couple of months ago in the Court of International Trade in New York, the court looked, there was a bunch of companies that took the president, this administration, not specifically the president as a person, but this administration to court to say that the use of the IEEPA is illegal, that the president doesn't have the authority to declare an emergency and then start using tariffs as a way to fix those emergencies. Because out of all presidents in the past, this is the first time IEEPA has ever been used for tariffs. So he was challenged, is this legal? And basically the court came back and said, no, it's not legal. So what does that mean? That means if now, of course, the United States government is appealing this and it's going to go through, I'm sure it's going to end up at the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm sure of it. If business wins, that means that all these tariffs that I've talked about, these ones, would all be declared illegal, and all the money that's been paid to date would need to be refunded. So you're not hearing a lot about that anymore in the newspaper and whatever. Things are just ticking along quietly behind the scenes. But just know that this is being appealed right now in the federal court in Washington, D.C. And it's the wheels of justice are grinding away in the background. So what has Canada done to retaliate? So what we've done, when the United States put 25% on steel and aluminum, we said, right back at you, 25%. They've since raised it to 50%. We've kept our powder dry. Something that a lot of Canadians don't know is that we also, starting in last October 2024, so before President Trump even took office, before the elections were held in the United States, Canada put a 25% surtax on China, steel from China, steel and aluminum coming from China. Why did we do that? Because President Biden did that in the United States. And I can honestly say, and please keep in mind that when I speak, I'm in situations like this, I'm expressing my own opinion, not that of my partners. In most cases, I don't agree with most of what Donald Trump talks about when it comes to trade. When he talks about China and some of the abuses to international trade that China has done, I have to say that, yeah, I sort of agree. I don't necessarily agree with every single little tiny thing he says about China, but overall, do I agree with the general sentiment? I do. There is a problem with China flooding the world with inexpensive steel to the detriment of other countries' industries. Same thing goes for aluminum. So when the United States decided under Joe Biden to take action specifically against China for steel, Canada said, right there with you. Okay? Then the current president came along, said all countries in the world, including Canada, 25% on steel, we said right back at you. We also said back on when Joe Biden was president that we were going to put 100% surtaxes on electric vehicles made in China. Electric vehicles made in China could come to the North American marketplace. I've heard different numbers, but I've heard for as low as $12,000 American. If electric vehicles like that came into North America, it would decimate the North American car industry and the number of jobs that would go along with that. So when the United States put 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, once again, we said, right there with you. So back in October 2024, we stood in line with Joe Biden and said, us too. We also said, when Donald Trump put tariffs on Canadian-made cars at 25%, we said, right back at you. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a future slide. And then finally, on the far right-hand side of the screen, we have list one. What is list one? List one is about 1,200 products, all made in the United States. That's what attracts these tariffs, all made in the United States. Most of it tends to be food products that are coming into Canada, but there's also some alcohol, Tennessee whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, ceramic toilets and sinks, because that's made in Pennsylvania. I mean, you have to kind of look at the map in the United States, look at every Republican state, what's the #1 export from that state? And we said, yeah, that's what we're going to put the tariffs. We'll put the tariffs on that. Hoping that the more pressure we put at the state level, that the state will call the White House saying, hey, you got to do something. Industries in my state are really hurting because the Canadians are putting tariffs on it. So that's how we came up with list one. Is there a list two? There is. It's about 4,500 items. We have not implemented it yet. We're keeping our powder dry. That list is being kept on the side, and it's our pull in case of emergency. If all else fails, it'll be 25% on a long list of goods that will dramatically impact Canadian consumers who buy things. The one thing that all these lists have in common is that the goods have to be made in the United States, with the exceptions of when I was talking about China. So now Canada, back at the end of June and then again at the beginning of July, took very specific steps to help the Canadian steel industry. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail on this. I'm just going to say, conceptually, what they said was, okay, right now we're charging steel and 25% on American steel and aluminum that comes into this country. But there's and Chinese steel steel and aluminum comes into this country. But there are other countries that are shipping, for example, Chinese steel from those countries. So I'm just going to pick a country, I'll say Belgium. You'll often see steel that was melted and poured in China will ship from China to Belgium. Maybe something will be done to it in Belgium. It's painted or something will happen to it, but then it's shipped to Canada. And what the Canadians have finally said is that what they're going to be doing is they're going to be trying to stop all of this from happening. This is completely aimed at China. What we're going to be doing is, we said, right now, it's 25% on US and Chinese steel. We're going to allow the same amount of steel that came in 2024 can come in without special tariffs that I'm about to describe. The moment that that amount has been exhausted, any amounts that come in over that is going to be a 50% tariff, for free trade agreement countries. And for non-free trade agreement countries, it's going to also be 50%, but at 50% of the 2024 volume. So now, and these surtaxes apply over and above everything else. So what does this mean? Canada's now stacking 50 plus 25. Okay, so we're getting serious about the steel, and we need to. There's also been a number of funds that have been set up. I'm not going to go through them in any sort of detail, but just know that there's a strategic innovation fund with $1 billion there. $10 billion was given to the large enterprise tariff loan facility, $450 million to regional tariff response initiative, and $70 million to labor market development. That's all specifically for steel. There are other programs too that I'll speak to in a moment. Now, what's interesting is that on April 16th, shortly after the Canadian election, the Carney government said, okay, we're hearing Canadian manufacturers saying these surtaxes that are getting charged on goods coming, American goods coming into Canada, it's hurting. It's hurting us. So what they said on April 16th is, when it comes to steel and aluminum, not from China now, I'm not talking China, I'm talking the US. When it comes to steel and aluminum from the United States or anything on list 1, if what's coming in from the United States into Canada is going to be used in a Canadian manufacturing or process, it's going to come in with no surtaxes attached to it. And in fact, not only that, you can go back if you're a Canadian manufacturer right now and you're bringing something into Canada and you're paying surtaxes, you don't have to. There's a way to stop paying it. And not only that, you can go backwards in time and get back all the surtaxes that you've paid if you're a Canadian manufacturer right back to day one. Okay, some companies still don't know about this. I'm not going to go through this one. So this one very quickly, it's Chinese. And if you bring in specific types of steel from China, you can, until December 31st, 2025, you can bring it in without any extra tariffs, because the Canadian market is like dying for specific kinds of steel. We need it, but it's very short term, only until December 31st, 2025. When you're talking about automobiles coming into Canada, Canada said any car that's assembled in the United States, we are going to charge 25% tariffs. What they did say, however, is that any part of the car, so on the left-hand side of the screen, any part of the car that's Canadian or Mexican, you don't have to pay tariffs to bring that car in the United States. So it's a car made in the United States, assembled in the US. What comes across the border, it's going to have Canadian parts in it and Mexican-made parts in it. If you can figure out as a car manufacturer how much those parts are worth, you don't pay tariffs on that. You pay tariffs on everything else. The US and Chinese and everything else, that's what you're going to pay tariffs on. And if the car doesn't qualify for the free trade agreement at all, it's really easy. 25%, no relief. So I talked about the fact that the Canadian government has put programs in place. This is at the federal level. There are also provincial programs. You know, we could have a whole session just on what help is available to Canadian companies who are coping and trying to survive through the tariff war. But EDC has been given $5 billion, BDC $500 million, and Farm Credit Canada $1 billion to help Canadian companies who are struggling with the tariffs. So one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, Joy, how do I minimize the amount of tariffs? First of all, is there a way that I can get out of paying the tariffs? 9 times out of 10, no. Because if agreement goes, can avoid. For companies, they don't have a good understanding of how to make their goods qualify for the free trade agreement. So that's a lot of the work that I do. I take a look at their manufacturing processes, where they're buying raw materials from, and I help them to figure out how to qualify for the free trade agreement. But there are in most cases, you cannot get away from the tariffs, but you can minimize the amount of tariffs that you actually pay. This is a list. I'm not going to go through it all. I'm just going to hit a few of the high points. One of probably the most effective strategies is using transfer pricing. Well, what's transfer pricing? Transfer pricing is what I said at the beginning, when two related companies buy and sell goods to each other. So just picture you're a Canadian company, and now you open up a US subsidiary, or you are a subsidiary of a US-based company. When you buy and sell goods between those two companies, that's called transfer pricing. When you look at how transfer pricing can be applied, the lower the price that you can legally charge between the two related parties, the lower the amount of tariffs you're actually going to pay. So there's all kinds of strategies in transfer pricing that will really mitigate the amount of tariffs that you actually pay. It's not bulletproof. Does it work for everyone? No, because if you don't have high levels of profit between the two companies, you can't declare goods to customs below cost. So when you only have cost plus a little tiny margin on top of it, you don't have a lot of room to play. If you have cost plus a bigger margin, you've got room to play where you could actually look at lowering the prices that get declared as they cross the border between the two parties that are selling. You have to keep in mind that you always have to make sure that that price declared meets all the legal requirements. There's other ways as well, dropping down to the bottom of the left-hand side. Remember I said when two companies buy and sell goods to each other that are unrelated, it's the price paid or payable that the two parties agreed on. That's your customs price. There's some things that don't need to be included in that. If you sell something to somebody in the United States, for example, or they sell it to you here in Canada, if you're attracting surtaxes, and there's transportation that's been included inside that price, you don't have to pay duties and taxes on transportation charges. So trucking charges, shipping charges, the airline charges, courier charges, whatever it is, you don't have to pay duty on that stuff. So if you're buying stuff from the United States and you're paying Canadian tariffs, or if you're shipping goods to the United States and you sell an all-inclusive price, if you pull those transportation out and you put it on a separate line item on the invoice, you don't have to pay tariffs on it. It's amazing when it comes to cost unbundling, how much can actually be saved when you actually start looking. I've just given you the most obvious ones of transportation. There are others. They're far more technical. I won't get into it today. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but there are a whole bunch of different cost unbundling strategies. And then second from the bottom on the right-hand side, duty drawback. In Canada, if you bring something in and you pay the Canadian surtaxes and you do whatever you're going to do to it as Canadian, even if you do nothing, and then you subsequently export it, you can get your Canadian surtaxes back. It's called a duty drawback. You go back to customs and you say to them, here's my proof of export. This is what I paid when I brought it in. It's left the country. I want my money back now that it's left the country. Canada will refund it. In the United States, these new era tariffs, commonly known as Trump tariffs, if you pay Trump tariffs going into the United States and you subsequently export them, no drawback, which is unusual. World Trade Organization rules generally state that if you pay duties going into a country, then those same goods leave the country is supposed to refund the duties. No drawback, specifically outlined in the executive orders. So when you pay a Trump tariff, it sticks. Okay. But a lot of Canadians don't realize that if they pay the Canadian tariff, then they export it. They don't realize that they can get that money back. They think it's a hard cost. So I've spent a lot of times talking to companies about how to get that money back. Now, this is a tariff journey map. And at the very beginning, you see customs planning now, right across the very top, now, near, and far. So what are we talking about now? Since February 3rd, when these threats of tariffs first sort of raised their heads, we've been talking about, oh, how are we going to minimize tariffs at the border, right? Everybody's staring down at their shoes right now about what am I doing right now today? There's a truck leaving. What am I doing right now today? That truckload. Then jump to the very far. Some companies are actually pondering, do I move my manufacturing to the United States? Is that how I get around all of this? Do I fold up business in Canada and move to the US? And this slide is just meant to say, whoa, before you make that far off decision, there's a number of different things that you could and should be considering before you make that move. Because making that move is more than just about tariffs. You have to think about the income tax implications of doing that. You also have to think about, winding up a company in Canada is not as easy as it sounds on paper. Okay, so there's a lot of things in the middle to think about, and that's what that slide is meant to show. And then finally, this is just a very busy slide that talks to a specific tool that KPMG has created. It's called the Tariff Modeler. So as I said earlier, I've been doing international trade for 40 years. And I can tell you that international trade data does not exist in companies' computers. It's not there, doesn't exist. It's not in your ERP systems. That data exists with your customs brokers, and your customs brokers create and send data to the government, whether it be the Canadian or US government, on your behalf. They're the ones holding your international trade data. And in times when everything was duty-free, didn't matter. Who cared about that data? You didn't need to look at it. You didn't need to analyze it. You didn't really need to understand what insights it gave you. Everything was duty-free. How much freer than free do you want to get? Now, with the tariffs, suddenly understanding what's buried in that data becomes important tools for decision-making for Canadian companies. And what Canadian companies lack is a way. So if you were to ask your customs broker, give me my data, they would send you this great big ugly Excel spreadsheet. And it is your data. I don't know about you. If I look at a big ugly Excel spreadsheet, it tells me nothing. It tells me nothing. You need a way to be able to digest that data and then have it, the ability to ask it questions and for it to come back and give you insight to your own data, your own historical data. So, I guess the takeaway that I want to leave with you here is that there's a tool out there that the vast majority of Canadian companies are just starting to realize they should have in their toolkit, but they don't. And it's your own data that sits with your customs brokers. Okay. So now, bang on, 40 minutes. As far as I'm concerned, we're now going to get into the best part of this, Q&A.
Okay. All right, so we're going to get into the Q&A right now. Thank you so much, Joy. That was very informative. And so for the folks online, you can just use the raise hand button feature if you have a question. And for the folks in-house as well, you can just raise your hand and enter your mic. So the floor is open for any questions. And I guess while folks are gathering your thoughts, for those who missed the agenda at the beginning, we following this Q&A, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we have some presentations from some local farmers and producers, as well as local manufacturers as well, just to understand, what all this information that Joy
is presented to us what it means on the ground in Dufferin County. So,
Sure. Oh, you're welcome. I know it was a lot, and
It's a lot, and it really helps to clarify.
Yeah.
Some of it. And I guess my first question is going to be, so this couldn't have just started when Trump took office. I mean, all the ins and outs of this has it been in the works for quite a while?
Great question. Great question. So two-part answer to that. The first part is the direct answer to your question. I don't know if any of you heard of something called Project 2025. The Democrats at various points in history accused the Republicans of having this 2025 agenda, this big thick report that they created with this roadmap. And they said, this is Donald Trump's roadmap. And the president, when he was on the campaign trail, kept saying, I know nothing about this 2025 report. It's not mine. I don't know nothing about it. He's deploying it page by page. So was this in the workings all along? I mean, I don't actually know when they started. My gut says from the moment that this current president lost the last election, they went into a war room and decided if they won again, exactly what would they do and how would they do it? So the first time this president was president, I think, not unlike a lot of the world, I think he was surprised. We were all surprised. I think he was surprised too. So did he come in with like a fully baked plan? No. Did he know how to be president? No. And he had a lot of people around him at that time that I'm going to call traditionalists, like, you know, people that had spent entire careers being in government and serving various presidents of all stripes, like Democrat and Republican. He was surrounded by those people. This time round, he's surrounded by his own team. He let everybody else go. It's his own team. And he had 4 years working with this group to put together Project 2025. So if anyone's interested in Project 2025, it is available online. It's about 900 and plus pages long. I've only read about 40 pages of it, the pages that's specifically related to trade. And I don't mean to sound flip, but I'm going to be, it's like we're on page 6. Like it's like, man, we are right on schedule. And that leads me to the second part of my answer, which would be, you know, I get asked a lot, where do you think the Canadian deal is going to land? What's our deal going to look like? I would have said a month ago, I would have said, we're probably going to end up exactly where we are now. Everything that qualifies for the free trade agreement, 0. Why? Because the automotive industry has fought so hard for that. Because if they can't get their car parts across the border for free, that industry is shut down on both sides of the border. So I think that industry has made it really clear to the president, we need that free trade agreement. It's not a nice to have. If we don't have it as an industry, we're dead. So that's where you got, okay, fine. For Canada and Mexico, things that qualify for the free trade agreement are free. Everything else is 25%. Now, he's threatened 35% starting this Friday. But again, they're saying anything that qualifies for the free trade agreement is free. The second part of my answer is that I think given what's happened with Europe and given what's happened with Japan, so Japan signed a deal for 15% across the board. That means 15% for Japanese automobiles, not 25 anymore. They got a deal. 15. Europe signed not a free trade agreement. They signed a memo or whatever, a page and a half document that Europe also got 15%. So now think about this for a second. What do Europe ships a whole bunch of stuff to the United States. Think Germany, think Italy. Cars, 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 cars. What does Japan ship to the United States? Honda, Toyota. Cars, 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 right? They ship more than that. But I mean, you look at what some of the most important exports from those countries are to the United States, it's automobiles. So suddenly now, if you have Japan and Europe can get cars into the United States at 15% and car parts at 15%, and Ford, GM, and Chrysler, who make cars between Canada, the US, and Mexico, have to pay 25 or 35% if the goods don't qualify for the free trade agreement. How are the Ford, GM cars or the North American car manufacturers going to compete with the Japanese and the Europeans? So what do I think is going to happen? I think we're probably going to end up with a deal as a country, something around 15% free trade agreement applies for qualifying goods. That's where I think we're going to end up based on what's happened over the past week. Had you asked me that question a month ago, I would have said, no, we're going to stay status quo. Do I think we'll get to zero tariffs, which is what Prime Minister Carney said that he was, his goal was? Not hope. I mean, just calling it the way that it is. It's not going to happen. And then people say to me, but he's only going to be president for 3.5 more years. So if I can just survive for 3.5 more years, we'll go back to a duty-free environment, right? So under Trump 1.0, he put tariffs in place against China. Biden didn't take them away. Biden touched them once. He raised certain ones. So what am I trying to tell you without directly saying it? We're in a new century. We're facing a new American thought relative to international trade. I think tariffs are going to be with us beyond this presidency. Different rates, maybe, different terms and conditions. Maybe they want our pork, maybe they want our beef or canola. I mean, I don't know. Those details will always be sort of in the mix and being negotiated, but I think we're in for a long haul of tariffs. It's going to outlive this presidency. Thank you for your question. It was a good question. Yeah. Microphone so they can hear you on the phone. Microphone so they can hear you on the phone.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I do it all the time.
I'm very interested in the legality of all this, which you touched on. So if it goes to the Supreme Court of the US and they carry on with their current thoughts,
Yeah.
will he just fire them and get a new judges? Or, can it carry some weight somewhere? And how will that play on international setup?
Another great question. Constitutionally, I don't think he can fire the Supreme Court justices. He can appoint them, but once they're appointed for life, right? And why they're appointed for life is so that they're not supposed to be impacted by politics. They're not supposed to fear that a president will fire them. Once they're appointed for life. Republican and Democratic presidents come and go, and they're secure in their job. And that's supposed to be the buffer that exists between making sure that they can uphold the law, regardless of what any party wants, because they're protected, right? That's what that life appointment means. Now, there have been different decisions that have come down from this particular Supreme Court that have been, I'll just call it controversial, interesting, unexpected, doesn't align with their previous decisions for similar type issues. So I don't know what's going to happen right now. I strongly suspect that in the Federal Court of Appeal, so the Court of International Trade is where it was first said illegal. Now they're appealing it to the federal court. I'm pretty sure the federal court is going to say illegal. That's when it gets kicked up to the Supreme Court. And if we lived in normal times, I'd say, look, for a trade techno nerd like me, I read the law and I say, clearly illegal. I'm not sure what we're going to get out of the Supreme Court. I'm not sure. If the Supreme Court does what it would traditionally do and say, no choice, Mr. President, this is illegal, what do I suspect will happen? Number one, I think the president would be enraged. He'd be enraged, right? And then an enraged president, I think we would see a number of executive orders once again come down. His people would probably find a different piece of legislation. And you'd see a number of executive orders come cascading down again. All of that to say, even if they lose in court and all of this is deemed illegal, I really don't think it's going to end. It's not going to end. If you read Project 2025, the whole goal of Project 2025 was to cut income taxes and replace the money that normally would have been made with income taxes with tariffs. And you may say, oh, there's a certain amount of sense to that, right? Okay, switch one bucket for the other bucket. Okay, except let's take it to its extreme. Let's say that the president's strategy of having everything built in the United States. The United States does not import anything. Everything is built in the United States. Elastic bands, Q-tips, you name it. It's all made in the USA, and they import nothing. How much tariffs are they going to collect? And they've cut income tax. So it's one of those, you're eating your tail. It doesn't make sense. You cannot replace income taxes with tariffs. You can't. It doesn't mathematically work, right? So, but I'm not sure. You know, it still surprises me that the markets haven't crashed or tanked or whatever, given what's happening. They've had moments where they've dipped, and then usually by the end of the day or by the next morning, they're right back up again. And we've reached record highs. And I think what's happening there is that people who are investing in the markets are looking at this and saying, okay, we're in a new era. Tariffs are now part of reality. They're not going anywhere. And at 15%, can we swallow 15% and survive? Yes. I'm saying 15 because that seems to be the newest number lately that's floating around. Although today he said India was going to be 25. Didn't hear that there was any negotiations. I just heard that India was 25. So that's kind of the thinking. Can we survive on 15%? Will we have to tighten our belts? Yes. But can we survive? Yes. So, okay, it's not as bad as it could have been. At 25 and 50% for some industries, like think of the steel industry right now in Canada. Everything they make going into the States is 50% tariffs. You can't survive on that. That's not survivable. So the stock markets are reacting in like I'll call it a conservative manner, saying with these tariff rates that he's talking about now, the 10 to 20% in that range somehow will make it work. I think a lot of people also thinking all we need to do is survive 3.5 years. And then hopefully we'll see, maybe tariffs will still be in place, but hopefully they'll come down like closer to 10%, something that's easier to swallow than 15 or 20.
Well, we will make adjustments
Yeah.
as well. In how we deal with that new pricing.
Yep.
That's what
We have to, no choice. So tariffs are inflationary.
Absolutely.
Tariffs are inflationary, and tariffs are not paid by other countries, just to be really clear. Tariffs are paid by the importer of record into a country. The importer of record is usually the company that sticks up their hand at the border and says, yeah, those are my goods. I'm responsible for everything. I'll comply with all laws and I'll pay all the duties and taxes on this. That's the importer of record. One thing that's true about Canada that's not true about other countries that deal with the United States, in Canada, because we're so friendly and we're so nice, we often in our negotiations with the Americans going back decades, not recent, going back decades, we say, oh, I'll be the importer of record into the United States on your behalf, me, the Canadian, because I'm competing against my biggest competitor who's in Ohio or Michigan or pick a state. So as a Canadian who's trying to compete with other American companies, if you bought from Michigan, Mr. Customer, you wouldn't have to deal with the border. So if you buy from me in Canada, don't worry about it. I'll take care of the US border for you. So there's about probably a third of Canadian exporters to the United States that act as importer of record, meaning they're getting hit coming when they bring something into Canada, and they're getting hit when they sell something to their American customer. So that's unique to Canada. Most other countries in the world do not act as importer of record into the United States. That's just us, right? Just based on a longstanding relationship based on trust and the fact that everything was duty free. And what we were probably talking about at the border was like, you know, the $25 FedEx charge or whatever. That's what we were talking about, right? And the headache of answering the phone calls if there's a question. We were willing to do that. But in this environment, we got it coming and going.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm curious a couple things. One is our dollar is worth about 70% of what American dollar is worth. Were the Canadian dollar to appreciate in value,
Yep.
would we not be in a very precarious position?
Absolutely.
A dollar at par, as well as tariffs on top of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we would be. So When your dollar is at par, your buying power, well, your selling power. So think of it this way. When the Canadian dollar is roughly at 70 cents, I'll just use that for a benchmark, 70 cents. It's like Canada is on sale for 30% off. When you're walking around the world with a US dollar and you want to buy stuff, hey, Canada's 30% off. They're on sale. Let's buy there. Right? And if you look at where we're geographically located, and if you look at our legislative framework and our cultural way of doing business, we're almost identical to Americans. So looking at Canada in the past often made sense. In 1965, when the original precursor to a free trade agreement was signed, the Auto Pact was signed in 1965. The United States and Canada at that time said, we want to make cars together. Why? Because it makes economic sense to make cars together. Essentially, what was going to happen was Canada was going to make the parts and the US was going to assemble the cars. I'm oversimplifying it, but that was kind of what the agreement was, right? So, and why did they want to make the car parts in Canada? We're on sale. Look back in history. We're on sale anywhere from 20 to 35%. So it made sense for them. So you're right. If our dollar goes up to $1 US, we're not on sale. We've lost our competitive edge. So when it comes to the dollar, did you have a follow-up? Because I want to talk about what President Trump and his dollar. So this current American president has said that he wants the American dollar to not be so valuable internationally. Because for the same reason I just said, he's looking at it saying, we're never on sale. The whole world uses the US dollar. So a US dollar is always worth 100 pennies. We're never on sale. Canada's on sale. Other countries that have currencies that are not worth as much as the American dollar are always on sale, and we're never on sale. He's saying, I want to be on sale. I want to have a low American dollar, and I want to have low inflation. Well, good luck with that. If you understand how it works, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So when I say what I was talking about earlier about the BRICS and the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are saying that they're thinking about walking away from the US dollar as its reserve currency. That would make the US dollar fall, but it would fall faster and farther than the current president would like to see it go. So he's saying, if you do that, I'm going to hit you with tariffs. Do not do that. But now there's almost an incentive in the world for large blocks of countries like that to look at a reserve currency other than the US dollar, because then suddenly their own currencies would be worth more within their buying block. So just imagine those countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they start to buy amongst each other. The United States is over there. North America is over there. They start to buy and sell from each other. And if they're not using the US dollar, they're using their own currencies, suddenly their buying power is greater. Because when you're constantly using the US dollar and your currency is only worth 65 cents, 75 cents, whatever, against the US dollar, it takes a lot to buy on the international market. Right behind you. Hi there.
Week. So I thought I'd get away for a few minutes and be challenged with two different matters that are affecting us on a grand scale.
I'm glad you can make it.
So a couple things. So first of all, the tariff is applied to the transfer price.
Yep. Yep.
50% of sales price.
So like there's no hard and fast rule to that, but I'll just put some numbers out there to give you a sense of it. So let's say you had a Canadian company and you sold to your American customer for $1. And then you met someone like me who said you really should consider transfer pricing as a strategy. You would set up an American company and you would sell your goods now to the American company, and your American company would sell to your US customer still for $1. So the customer doesn't see any changes. The customer's paying $1. Doesn't matter who he's buying it from, he's paying $1. You would then, instead of when it crosses the border between you and the customer declaring $1, when you declare it to your own company in that you own in the United States, you can usually declare it for something like 85 cents, 80 cents, 85 cents. So you can save 15 to 20%.
So well, let's get to the specifics. Okay. And you know, somebody from those countries into the States.
Sorry, I can't. Can you pull the microphone down? I can't hear you.
Sort of,
There you go.
anyway, make a point. There's agreements now with Japan and Europe.
Yep.
And they're interested in selling cars in the States.
Yep.
So.
And they use transfer price.
To US citizens,
Absolutely, they do.
which that price would be what, 75% of retail?
In the automotive industry, it wouldn't be that much of a differential. They're probably saving something like, because without getting into too much technical information, the American company is not actually taking on any risk. If the car is built in Japan and Honda Tokyo sells it to Honda USA, Honda USA is not actually taking on any real risk in the transaction. So you would probably see anywhere from like a 5 to maybe 10% differential. But still, if you're saving, instead of declaring it at $1 when it crosses the border, if you can declare it at 90 cents, you just save 10% of the 25%, right? Assuming it's 25%. It doesn't cost them anything. All that happens is it shifts tariffs around, it shifts profits around. Sorry, not tariffs. It shifts profits around. So now you have company A and company B. They're related. Same owners, if you want to think of it that way. All you're doing is you're taking some of your profit when you sold it out of Canada for $1. Let's say your costs were 75 cents, so you made a 25% profit. I'll just use easy numbers. Now, when you sell it to the United States, your US company that you own, and you sell it to the US company for 85 cents, all you've done is you've taken some of the Canadian profits and you've put it in the United States.
Correct.
Yeah.
They have to pay this tariff.
Yep.
So after the tariff is paid, whatever is left is what they can sell that car for. They have to compete against American cars.
Yes, except that American cars, there's a lot of American cars that are built in Mexico. If you actually look at where they're made now, yes, they're made in Mississippi, North Carolina, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan. I'm probably forgetting a state or two. There are a lot of car manufacturing facilities in the United States, but Mexico also makes a lot of cars. They make more cars than we do. We make more parts in Canada. Yes, we make cars. We make more parts than cars. The same Mexico is also parts and cars. So all of that to say, what you're saying is absolutely correct. When the North American Free Trade Agreement, now called in Canada CUSMA, blanketed the three countries, Canada, the US, and Mexico, and made us a duty-free zone for automotive, Japanese and European cars coming in always had to pay a 2.5% tariff. It was small, but still, they always had to pay a 2.5% tariff. Now they're being hit with a 25% tariff, which you think, okay, great, we're going to block them out, right? And we're going to create more jobs in North America. Except now they're going to be paying a 15% tariff to access the market. And Canada and Mexico, for parts and finished cars, are going to be paying 25% to access the US market. That's Ford, GM, and Chrysler. Right? Like, that's why I think.
Guys, if Mr. Trump is like computers and front companies.
I'm personally, obviously, I was not sitting in the Oval Office when the conversations were held, but I am personally absolutely confident that the only reason why Canadian and Mexican goods entering the United States right now that qualify for the free trade agreement are free is because the automotive industry said, holy hop, we depend on that free trade agreement. You have to give us that free trade agreement. Or I don't know if you've ever heard Flavio Volpe, he's the president of the Canadian Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He predicted that if the tariffs hit, the Canadian automotive industry would shut down in 7 to 9 business days. And that would have a ripple effect. That would shut down production lines in Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, South Carolina. It would shut down production lines on the US side of the border in almost every state that manufactures cars. So I think that's what made the Oval Office finally say, okay, fine. We give everything that qualifies for the free trade agreement. We're just going to say it's free because the automotive guys are saying they need it. And there was no political way. How was the Oval Office going to say, well, we're going to give duty-free access to the automotive industry, but to farmers? No. We're going to charge you for all that potash you bring in from Canada. We're going to charge you, right? We're going to charge you 10% for your potash. So they couldn't do that. So that's why they said everything that qualifies for the free trade agreement for all industry sectors is going to be free. Will it always be free? I'm not a betting woman, but I would suspect that yes, it will always be free. Why? Because the automotive and our food industry are so integrally intertwined with the US production of cars and food. We grow the wheat, they make the Cheerios. I mean, it's a simple example, but it's more than just cars. We're so integrated with so many of their supply chains that it doesn't make sense for them to not give us duty-free access. But then again, this is an unconventional administration.
Steel and aluminum.
Yep.
Which we expect there. So they're not.
And copper's about to start as well. Copper's going to get 50% as well.
Those metals are
Correct. So those metals, so when you're talking any of the sectoral tariffs, none of those sectoral tariffs, well, they're gone now, but the ones that I was talking about, none of those are affected by the free trade agreement. So steel and aluminum, including Canadian steel and aluminum that qualifies for the free trade agreement, 50%. Somebody.
So we used to have this WTO.
Yep.
Seems off. So, a lot of these sectors, industry, products, they were also covered in WTO.
So let me tell you a story about the WTO. So back in 1994, I think, 94, 95, the United States voted to allow China into the WTO. I hit my head on the desk that day, and anyone who does trade like I do did the same thing. Like, oh my God, what the heck are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? We're going to live to regret this day. Well, this day has come. So the WTO has been fundamentally, it started to break in the mid-90s. By the early 2000s, it was not really functioning. And why wasn't it functioning? The United States, so there's an arbitration tribunal. And there's a group of people that sit basically like on a committee. And when any WTO country has a grievance against another WTO country, you can bring the grievance to that committee and they act as mediators and they get things fixed up. Well, the United States gets to a point, I think there's 9 in total. The United States gets to a point 3. Keep in mind, post-World War II, it is the United States that set up the World Trade Organization. They also set up the United Nations based out of New York, right? So a lot of this stuff goes back to post-World War II. So the United States started saying, those 3 seats that are vacant, we're not sending anybody to put them in. So then you had 6, and the people automatically roll off after a certain amount of time. So now you had 6 people instead of 9 that were adjudicating. Then they rolled off. Countries started to try and put people in their place. And the United States was blocking it. That goes back to Obama. Obama blocked it. Trump blocked it. Biden blocked it. Now we're back to Trump 2.0. The WTO is, for all intents and purposes, broken. It's broken.
Okay, I have one other question. Given the fact that these trade, they're not reciprocal tariffs, so states of Europe and Japan, there's not going to be tariffs on money there, it's going there. So
How's that reciprocal, right? But yeah.
So isn't that going to realign over time trade? Eventually, over time, because of the additional cost of including the US in the equation, if that circumvent the US and come back at some point in time.
Yes. So what's happening now is definitely going to realign traditional trading patterns that have been in place since post-World War II. There's a number of different articles that have been written about this over time, where when you look at how the Western world trades, so think Europe, think, you know, Canada, the United States, don't think Africa, don't think South America, think the Western, Northern Hemisphere, Western world. It tends to trade east-west. And what's happening now in the world, and it started to happen even before Trump, was the world was already starting to shift north-south. And what does that mean? That means instead of looking to China for inexpensive labor, look at Costa Rica. Right, it's closer, you can truck it, and you know, you don't have to, there's not a whole ocean between it. So there were already shifts that were happening to international trade routes that were happening due to driving economics. And you know, one thing that I'll say is Canada has 15 free trade agreements with and yeah, that's what I'll say about that. I mean, I could go on. Stephen Harper just recently, like in the past 3 days, put out an interview where he was talking about what he thinks is going to happen. So now I'm just going to quickly paraphrase him. I agree with him. He sees that what is happening right now will permanently shift trade routes away from the United States. Not all of them. It's impossible to ignore the world's largest economy, but it will shift a lot of things away from the United States, very likely permanently. There will be a new world order, and I think it'll be based on blocks. So you're going to have the United States, which will continue to be the world's largest economy, will be like a center of gravity. You're going to have a whole bunch of countries that are going to rotate around that particular market. Then you're going to have China and India come together. That's going to be, because you put those two together, now you're equal to the United States. Put those two countries together and you're going to have a sphere of influence. You're going to have countries that rotate around that market, and never the two shall meet, because you're going to have tariffs that are going to block the other block from coming into your block, if that makes sense, right? You're going to have, so things, I agree with Stephen Harper. This isn't in the long term. I don't see it as being a good move for the United States. Obviously, the U.S. administration feels differently than I do, feels differently than Stephen Harper. I guess we'll have to wait to see who's right. You there?
We'll take one last
question. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
Quite
welcome.
enjoyed your presentation. You ended on the carry.
Thank you.
And so since we're talking about it, Kusa,
Mhm.
it is on my mind. You know, I keep thinking, why would we continue to have a deal? You know,
Yeah.
work. That's really upsetting to me. And I know we can't just rip it up, right, and walk away because we have impacted, and they're the largest, you know, economy. However, structurally, why would we? Like, do you have any insights, any thoughts about whether this would look different? You know, when it's up for review and it's negotiation next year, because I just feel like we will continue to go down this path. You know, because America, they have a big bad bully that can pull the trigger whenever I feel like. And so I just wanted to do that.
Yeah, there was a beautiful article written by the Financial Times out of Europe where they talked about how a trade agreement with this particular administration isn't really worth the paper that it's written on, except they said it in a cuter way, isn't worth the tweet that it, whatever. They like, and I can't say that I disagree. You're right that the free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico is up for negotiation. Technically speaking, in 2026, I think the negotiations are going to start in 2025. I think this fall, timeline, because I think what we're going to see are, instead of one three-way trade agreement, Canada, the US, and Mexico, I think the Americans want to have an American-Canada free trade agreement, then a separate agreement, America-Mexico, right? Which would break a lot of the supply chain logic that has been built across North America going back 30 years. So that's what I think is going to happen. Should Canada sit down at the free trade negotiation table with the United States? I think we don't have a choice. 76 cents out of every Canadian dollar that's exported goes to the United States. Do I wish that that number wasn't so high? Yes. I wish that number was more like 50%. And I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. Canada has 15 free trade agreements with 51 countries covering 60% of the world's GDP. We're so used to just thinking about the United States because they're physically right. I mean, most Canadians live within a 90-minute drive of the US border, right? It's just so easy that I'll say it, and I don't mean to, insult anyone in this room, but as a country, we've gotten lazy. We don't have to be global. We live next door to the Americans. Why do we need to be global? I don't speak those other languages and I don't eat that food. Like, what are we talking about? Interprovincial trade barriers are starting to come down. That's something that I've watched my entire career. I'm an international trade specialist, but trade within Canada. In 2017, the 10 Canadian provinces and 3 Canadian territories signed a free trade agreement within Canada. It's called the Canada Free Trade Agreement. And at that time, there were 340 exceptions. Canada would not have signed a free trade agreement with another country if there was 340 exceptions, but we signed it because it was like the political thing to do. Oh, all the provinces were all going to get along. But now, thankfully, we're starting to see that provinces are putting up their hand. Ontario's done it. Nova Scotia's done it. Manitoba's done it. I'm sure there's others as well. I'm just not remembering them that have put up their hand to say, our exceptions in that deal, we're wiping them off the table. Elbows up, we got to start selling east-west. Selling north-south, we'll always have to do it because it's the nature of where we live and the nature of our economy is to sell south. We have to start selling east-west. And that's both within Canada and east meaning Asia, west go all the way to Europe. And all the way across Canada while you're doing it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Joy. That was very informative. Okay, so let's give it up for Joy. Okay, so we're gonna quickly move to the next stage of our seminar this afternoon, and I'll call on Colleen. Colleen, are you still online? Colleen McKenzie is with local manufacturer Novalex. We've had a lot of discussions this afternoon around, auto manufacturing. Not exactly what Novalex does, but they are in manufacturing, and I think it's important for us to start this next segment with that perspective. After Colleen, we're going to quickly move on to Mark Russer, who is with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Just in the interest of time, if folks can keep it to just a quick 5 minutes. Like I said at the beginning of this, we really want to understand what all these tariffs mean for local manufacturers, local producers, and that will inform some of the decisions that we all work on making in the future. So, Colleen.
Thank you. Believe me, I'll be really quick. There's a whole pile of summary in this. So our company in Orangeville, its original name is Direct Plastics, but we have a U.S. Parent company, which is called Novalex, which does all flexible packaging. So it affects paper and plastic. The Orangeville facility in particular does customized plastic packaging. And so in a nutshell, 80% of our business is sold into the United States. And as it stands now, the output of our goods is in danger of tariffs or should more changes, more tariffs, whether it's CUSMA or tariffs coming from the United States, it's going to hit us because oil and gas, all of those different things that are on that list, I'm assuming. But because all of the plastic that we use is not involved in the tariffs, in the tariff war, I should say, we as a company are absorbing that portion of the cost. And because of that, obviously, we have to do cost cutting, cost reductions, like sourcing locally in Canada, using resources that we've not for products that we've not normally used from our existing customers or our existing local suppliers, which means we're testing and trialing new resins, because obviously resins are the how plastic is made. So that affects our raw material. It also affects some of our WIP, because sometimes we have to outsource some of our film from a different supplier. So we're trying to stay within Canada there. But the main thing with all of the cost cutting and everything is that we're trying to emphasize growing our Canadian sales. Novalex is starting to move things around, trying to move some of the Canadian customers back up to the Canadian locations, and some of the US stuff back down to make it a little easier. But obviously they can't do it with everything, because that will close. If they took most of our customers and put them back in the States, we would have to close our doors very quickly. So really that is it in a nutshell. The main part of my job is HR, so I stay away from this a little bit, but part of senior management, you hear it all the time.
Yeah. And quick follow-up, Colleen, because we had this discussion a few months back. What have the impacts of these uncertainties had on your workforce and the decisions you're making around the workforce?
Well, unfortunately, because of part of it, it's not all of it, but when all of these, I'm going to say, prior to Mr. Trump taking office, while he was still campaigning, a lot of our customers started not buying. They were going to hold off and see what was going to happen. So obviously that affected our sales, and all of the new business that we expected didn't come in. It's not gone, but it got delayed. So we actually suffered during part of our busiest time a slowdown, in which we had to lay people off and change the shifts to make them smaller shorter, just to try to keep our workforce. So it did hit us hard. Was it completely tariffs? I can't say that it was, but it would have been a deciding factor from our customers.
To know. Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. We're going to call up Mark Russer from the OFA.
Is there a light up here?
Okay.
No, it is more. I'll do it from here. I want to just give you a little bit of background, because I'm here representing agriculture as some other members, but agriculture is a little bit different than other industries. We deal with a whole long list of uncertainties that other industries don't deal with. And I think it's important to acknowledge that farmers are essentially gamblers. exist in an environment where there are a whole long list of things that we can't control. We can't control whether it's too hot or too cold or too wet or too dry. We can't control what prices we receive. They're set somewhere else. And additional tariffs are just one more addition to the uncertainties that we have to deal with. And in terms of specifically how they will affect us, in terms of specifically how they will affect us, I'm not going to focus on that. They're just one more in the long list of uncertainties. And I think the issue with uncertainties is also the same. Call it confidence in business. When we aren't certain what's going to happen and we don't have confidence in our decisions, we're not going to invest. And when farmers aren't investing, they're not building buildings, they're not doing tile drainage, they're not building barns, they're not doing anything. And I think that that is important because it all influences productivity. If we're not becoming better and we're not investing, we're not only staying the same, we're actually going backwards. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And so I think one of the important questions here, since we're in a municipality, is what can a municipality do to help the business of agriculture? And since it's a national issue, it's an international issue, I'm not sure that municipalities can do a lot, but they can do some things that would help agriculture. And I'll go through a very short list because some of them are rather simple to address. And they bring certainty and they give farmers confidence. And they're as simple as dealing with the issue of trespass. And the amount of damage done by trespassers to farmers is enormous. And it could be dealt with at the municipal level instead of at the criminal level by simply implementing bylaws and enforcing them. And that would help farmers. Another one might be drainage. We depend on drainage to provide certainty for us. Gets rid of the water, we're certain that our crops can grow because it's drained. When a drainage ditch is impeded in some way, we have a matter of hours to get that impediment out of there before we start to lose money. We don't have days, we don't have weeks, and we don't have months, we don't have time for it to go before council. It needs to be dealt with within hours. And that can be done and is done in some municipalities. Another one would be roads and bridges. We depend on roads and bridges for a whole lot of things. And the normal things like having the overcome and having our grain moved down the roads and so on. When a bridge disappears or is gone or is not replaced by municipality, that creates a whole lot of issues. It makes it more expensive to bring feed, takes longer time, and it even influences some things that you don't normally think of. For instance, if you have kids and they go on the bus and their bus ride changes from 15 minutes to an hour, that's a big deal in the countryside. That breeds uncertainty. That makes the countryside not as nice a place to live when you don't have roads and bridges. And the last one, and I think possibly the most important one, has to do with municipal planning, both urban planning and rural planning. And agriculture exists best and flourishes in an environment where there's not scattered rural development. And municipalities have a huge role to play in ensuring that agriculture has a place to grow and flourish, and be as important to the economy as it possibly can. And I would encourage all municipalities to deal with those issues of both rural planning and urban planning, because it is a big deal and it makes a big difference. So just 4 small things the municipality can do. And I don't think I'll leave it at that, because Joy, you did such a great job of explaining how tariffs work. And I wish more people could hear that. And Can I, in my 10 minutes or whatever it is, ask one more question?
Yep.
And that is, we have a president of our neighboring country who has an idea along with some friends or associates. Some ideas that don't seem to make sense to us. Why is it that so many people in that country are going along with what he has proposed without standing up and saying, this is the problem? Do you have any insight into that?
I don't have actual insight as to how the president thinks. I mean, if I did, I would be an extraordinarily rich person. People would be paying me millions to let them know what he's thinking. But what I can say to that is that it's about 50% of Americans sort of agree with what President Trump is doing. Now, if you look at some of the recent polling, that number is starting to drop. Like we're like 60% of them now don't agree with what he's doing on tariffs. The main issue there is that when you're in the United States, for a lot of American companies, they are not international at all. Small to medium-sized companies in the United States completely live within the United States. They don't sell internationally, they don't buy internationally. So for a lot of them, they think that it sounds things like reciprocal tariff, which doesn't exist, by the way, as I already explained. There's no such thing as a reciprocal tariff. It's a made-up construct, but it sounds logical and it sounds like, yeah, I want that. If they charge me that, that's what I'm going to charge them. Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds fair. Without really understanding how the bigger world economy and how the bigger world trade sort of works. So do I have actual insight and why are more people not standing up? I think we haven't felt the pain of tariffs yet. Not to say that they've been completely painless. That's not what I'm saying. Some people have felt pain. Have we felt the full brunt of the tariffs? No, we have not. Because I was listening to, I'm sorry, Pauline say that, you know, what her company was doing. My experience is that some companies are eating the tariffs. Some of them are passing them on to customers and some are doing 50-50, eating half and passing half on. Because what a lot of companies are trying to do when they're eating the tariffs now is to stop the pain from hitting their customers so that their sales don't fall. Right? So they're taking a hit on the profits because they want their sales to stay stable. That is not a sustainable strategy. That cannot go on forever. So I think as we get into the fall and into the winter, we're going to feel, Americans are going to feel more tariff pain. You're going to see prices at Walmart go up because Walmart and Amazon and some of the big giants in the United States have admitted that they're eating tariffs. But that can't last forever. When the prices at Walmart go up, you're going to start, I think, hearing a lot of more pushback from the United States, like people standing up saying, I don't like this idea. I you know, make it go away. Whether or not the administration will heed that, I don't know, simply because the big, beautiful bill that passed has got those income tax cuts in it that I was talking about, that the plan is to replace the income tax money with tariff money. How much money have they collected so far? The last number that I saw, which would be about 2 months old now, was 122 billion had been collected in US tariffs, which was more than the US government had planned to do. And that's because the tariffs were stacking. Remember I was saying the 25 was 25 and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, in some cases it was getting up to like 100%. And that's not what they meant, but they were taking the money. Hey, we'll take the money, take the money, take the money. Until finally some, you know, people were screaming in the Oval Office. They said, okay, no more stacking. So I can't answer your question other than to say, I think it's because there hasn't felt the full pain of the tariffs yet. We're only at the beginning of it. More pain is on the way. And I hate to say that. I hate to say that. But I think your points about being a farmer and some of the risks that come being a gambler, I hear you. I just wanted to say that Canada's new pledge to spend 2% of its GDP on NATO includes things like expanding our ports, roads, bridges, and overall national infrastructure when it comes to transportation. So that's airports, seaports, trucking terminals, roads, bridges, all that stuff is part of that spend. Thank you, yeah.
Thank you, Joy. Okay, we will invite up Leo Blythe. Leo sits on the board of the Grain Farmers of Ontario, so Leo will be providing us some perspective from that angle. And I'll ask again, just keep it at 5 minutes so that in the interest of time, we can all get out of here.
Thank you, yeah. And I'll try to hold this mic so everybody can hear. It's right up here. Use the mic. I'm a farmer and a director on the Grain Farmers of Ontario and a director on the Dufferin Federation of Agriculture. And it's sort of in my capacity as a grain farmer that I was asked to speak. So I wanted to thank Mark for raising two issues. I don't know how many municipal people are listening, but my farm, one of my farms, comes right to the boundary of Shelburne, just west of here. And I've been trying to get a petition going, or I filed a petition to have a municipal drain to drain the easterly half of that farm about 7 or 8 years ago. So that's still in process. And every year it costs me money because I'm not getting rid of the water. So I'm a little disappointed that it has to take that long. I don't think it has to. I don't know why the wheels of bureaucracy turn so slowly, but it costs me money every year. And thank you for raising the issue of trespass. I have visitors that trespass my fields and my farms every year. And not only do they trespass, but sometimes they steal stuff. So I have that loss as well. So I was asked to say, how are tariffs impacting me? So I know with the grain farmers, we have a bunch of researchers that justify their time, and they came up with this very long list of all the possible products that are impacted. And I looked at that list. It's a very long list. There's lots of products on there, many of which we don't really use that much. The biggest one on that list, I think, is tires. So tires that are coming in are tariffed. Well, I don't know why tires have to be tariffed. We were able to argue with our federal government. I think they pushed for that to have many of the things that we get from the States not tariffed. So a lot of fertilizers, chemicals, seed, they're not tariffed. I don't know about equipment per se. And we do have a lot of what we call short line manufacturing of equipment throughout this area. There's a lot of small businesses that manufacture different pieces of farm equipment, and they got to bring in steel because most of the stuff is made from steel. I don't know whether they have to pay a tariff on that steel or if they're able to source it all domestically or not. I just don't know. But I'm sure if they're getting charged for it, I'm going to get charged for it eventually. Regarding grains and oilseeds themselves, they still trade freely across borders, so that's not impacting us. However, we're at about a 10-year low with grain and oilseed prices. Our prices are determined largely on boards of trade, such as the Chicago Board of Trade. So we're at 10-year lows. Our input costs are not at 10 years lows. As a matter of fact, they've risen a lot with COVID, and some of them come down a bit. But the war with Russia, we source a lot of our fertilizer from that part of the world, China, Russia, and Belarus. And because we have such a regulated country, we don't want to take any risks in terms of our environment. A lot of that manufacturing is, we could make our fertilizers here, but we don't because it takes forever to try to get an environmental assessment that will allow somebody to go ahead and make an investment to have a fertilizer plant. So that is costing us money. Getting back to commodity prices, I think the fundamentals would argue that the prices should be higher than what they are. I think there's a lot of negative sentiment in the marketplace, trying to see whether or not the US and China are going to reach some kind of agreement. The lion's share of soybeans from the US and Midwest used to go to China, and there are very few, if any, soybeans from the US going to China. It's all Brazil, and we're caught up in that. So that's costing us big time. And somebody referenced the big, beautiful bill south of the border that was just passed. And that is going to give more money to my farming friends in the Midwest. So they're getting a lot more money out of the mailbox than we are. And we're supposed to have free trade. And so that is hurting us because we have to compete against all these different programs. And I could go There's about 5 or 6 of them that the US farmer can access. And I think a lot of oats come from the Midwest, so that they're looked after. So that big, beautiful bill, maybe just one statement from, we have people doing research on that. So comparison farm in southwestern Ontario and in the Midwest. So this is business risk management programming between the two different countries. Is about $115 to $172 per acre in favor of a US producer. So on a 1,000-acre farm, that's serious money that we're not getting. I was glad to hear, I don't often listen to the radio on Saturday morning, but I was listening to CBC in the House or whatever Saturday morning. And they were interviewing Pierre Poilievre, and they were kind of asking what he thought about supply management, Bill C-202. He didn't really say a whole lot about that, but he said, we need to go after the Americans for all their money that they're giving to their farmers. I don't know. You know, so the argument is, can we go after them? And will they change anything? I think it's doubtful that they'll change anything. It seems equally doubtful that our administration is going to support us to the level that they're supported in the States. But given the fact that we had a unanimous approval for supporting supply and managed industries, I would like to see that all sectors of agriculture in this country flourish. Did I use 5 minutes?
That was perfect.
All right. I'll be around for a few minutes harvesting wheat. I'd like to get back at it, but if anybody has a burning question that I can try to give some perspective on, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Leo. I'm going to invite up George Van Kampen, who is a local dairy farmer. George will be our last presenter for this afternoon.
Thank you, Jan. Man, a few words, so it probably won't be 5 minutes. But I am a dairy farmer, just farm down close to Laurel. I represent Dairy Farmers of Ontario. I am board member for our region. There's 3,200 dairy producers right around there in Ontario. We make up, we are the largest agriculture sector in Ontario. And like Leo was saying, a lot of the things that affect crop farmers affect dairy farmers because we all do grow crops for our cattle team. So we face all the challenges that they do, plus more. Like we hear that Trump all the time, he goes on and on about supply management being such an irritant. And you know, we charge 400% tariff, but we did allow under Kuzma 1.0 or whatever you want to call it, 100,000 tons of dairy free access, tariff free access to Canada. The U.S. gets. They didn't fill it all, but in 2024 they imported 800, or Canada imported 877.5 metric tons of, $877.5 million worth of product into Canada, and we exported $357 million worth of dairy products to the U.S. So we have a trade imbalance. Canada has a trade imbalance of 500 million with the States. So I'm really not sure what Trump was talking about with we have a trade imbalance, and dairy is such a, like, and not only dairy, like it's mostly in dairy. There's like supply management already hates dairy, and we don't know why for the life of us why we are such an irritant, you know. However, we are like, and the Canadian government has allowed access to Canada with free trade to Canada of dairy products between the WTO and the CETA and the CPTP and the rest of them. It's almost 18% access granted into Canada of dairy products. So it's a huge concern of us that like tariffs right now don't bother us because we fill the domestic market, but we are terrified of what our Canadian government is going to give up to get a deal. Like we like say we already give up 18% of our product, our market to foreign goods. So we really don't think we can afford a whole lot more. And it's tough, like Leo was already alluding to that big American bill down to states. So, like, it's tough to compete with those guys with that extra money, like, we don't dream big enough to think that Canada is gonna match that funding in the state, from the states. Like, on a free, totally free market, like, we're sure we can compete with the US and anybody in the world. Like, we have best genetics anywhere, like for our cattle. We have better climate than most places in the world to produce milk. Like, we could compete if it was a fair and equal playing field. But dairy, especially, for some reason, countries just love to subsidize dairy. Like, in our country, we've decided to put up trade barriers to get dairy products into Canada. We have a supply management, so like, it's good for the farmers, like Leo and Mark were talking about investments. Like, a lot of dairy farmers put investments into their farms. I know right now, actually, we're going through a bit of an investment. We are putting an addition on a barn, and these tariffs, they make everything a little bit more expensive. Like, it's going to be a few $1 million for this addition, but like, and it all goes back into the economy. So, like, dairy is good for the rural economy. It's good for consumers. Like, when we think about a little bit, but the disruption was very limited for at retail. So supply management has a lot of positives. Hopefully our government doesn't trade it away. We did get that bill C 202, I think it was called, or whatever. So hopefully they hold true and don't trade away our industry. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George. Thank you so much. Okay. Many thanks to all our presenters this afternoon. Thanks again. Thanks again to Joy. That was a very insightful presentation. Thank you for the Q&A as well, being able to answer questions from the folks that were in-house and online. So I really appreciate that. Before we all hop out of here, next steps. We will be emailing out the recording for this seminar, and so be on the lookout for that. That will be going out in a couple of weeks, and then as well any other additional news that comes from this whole tariff situation. We'll make sure to share that through that newsletter email. So be on the lookout for that. If we don't have you on our mailing list, please reach out to us. Jasmine's email address is jpanesar@dufferincounty.ca, and we'll make sure to keep you informed and up to date on the next steps here. But yes, we are actually, I should announce, we are actually working with KPMG in a primary data collection effort. And so they are helping us visit farms and local businesses just to understand how operations are going on, the next steps, the decisions, operational decisions, and workforce related decisions that local businesses are making, because, without data, we can't really make informed short or long-term decisions. So be on the lookout for communications around that. I'll be reaching out to a number of folks. I know Kevin is online, so Kevin and myself have been reaching out to folks, and we'll be working together. Kevin is with KPMG. We're working together to gather a lot of that information, which I think for sure will be beneficial for Dufferin County as we plan for our community. But I think the data and the analysis that comes from that will be very beneficial for businesses as well as you make your operational decisions around tariffs and trade. So thank you all once again for attending this, and be on the lookout for some next messaging on when the next seminar is going to be, most likely in September, but specific dates, times, location will be communicated out. So thank you all again. Thank you.